All right, good to go.
Okay, well, this is the regular board meeting for the School Board of Waunakee Community School District, June 8th, and we are meeting at 7 p.m., although we're a few minutes late. And first, we just need to call the meeting to order and note all school board members are present. And I would just like to thank the community who's out there watching and listening. And sorry we're a few minutes late. Our closed session went a little bit long. This is the time of year you do a lot of hiring. So we had to get through that first. And our first item is approval of the minutes from last board meeting. Actually, two meetings, May 11th of 2020 and May 26th. Are there any additions or corrections? I see a motion from Jack.
Second.
And a second from Brian. No other comments? Then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And then we move on to approval of the agenda. I don't believe there's any additions, correct, Randy?
The only changes we had were the update the board received from the HR report for our hires this evening, which we will address in the consent agenda this evening.
Okay, then a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Jack. And
Second
from Joan. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say no. And that takes us to public comments. And as under our new policy, every month, we invite the public to make any comments to the school board or the management of the school district on any issue they would like to. Do we have anything, Randy or Rebecca?
We have nothing tonight. We don't have anything formal that was specifically submitted for the meeting. I would say over the last week, we've had a number of correspondence, some that have been sent to me, certainly some that have been sent to the board, certainly around our equity work, around many of the incidents that are happening around the country with the George Floyd response, and just encouraging the district to continue to move forward with their equity work, and particularly looking at how we can improve curriculum and experiences for kids. I think we had, all of us received a few different emails around that. I've also received some correspondence just with regards to, as we start to look at reopening, as far as the different models that are out there from the CDC, and just concerns from the respect of kind of how stringent our rules would be with regards to personal protective equipment for students or masks, and to what degree some of those protocols will be in place. So I think we've responded to, at least I think we've responded to all of the requests or the communications that have come in, but those weren't specifically designated for tonight, but I think it was worthy of at least mentioning those because they came in certainly as public input to us over the last week.
All right, and you have nothing there, Rebecca?
Nothing here.
Okay, then we'll move on to board reports. First is a report from the WTA, which probably I should read since they're not here to read it. I would encourage them in the future to just hop on a Zoom meeting and give it that way. And hopefully we can get to that. So the WTA, the Teachers Union, update for the board on June 8th of 20. They stated, as we head into summer break, the WTA has a few updates that we would like to share with the school board and administration. The ad hoc committee, which we'll be discussing a little bit later, the WTA executive team stands in full support of the board's efforts to establish an ad hoc committee to study and provide recommendations on issues related to inclusion and equity. This work is absolutely essential as we reflect on ourselves as individuals and as a district, and as we seek to grow our ability as a district to serve all of our students, especially our students of color. We as educators have an obligation to ensure that each and every student is provided with a safe, inclusive, and equitable educational experience. This committee and the work which it will begin in relation to inclusivity and equity is essential to meeting the call of that obligation. We understand that this will only be a starting point. To that point, the WTA executive team looks forward to partnering with the district as we continuously evolve toward becoming a district that fully embodies inclusive and equitable practices. Planning for the fall. We know that many processes and decisions are still up in the air regarding what school will look like at the beginning of the year this fall. We appreciate the district's effort to seek out teacher voices while engaging in discussions around planning for the 2020-2021 school year. We look forward to continuing this dialogue throughout the summer as new developments unfold. Thank you for providing us with a platform to give you an update regarding the work that WTA has been doing on behalf of our students, teachers, staff, and district. Ashley Taylor and Kyle Emmert, WTA co-presidents. And that then takes us to board reports on action items. First is any individuals of the board who have something that has come up in the past month, anything they've been to. I would like to first mention Randy and I and Mike did participate in a meeting with the village about the moving of the fact that the planning commission and us are on the same night. The village stated that they're going to look into trying to move their meeting a half hour earlier. They find most of their meetings are only an hour long, so that would put them between the 5:30 and 6:30 time frame, which would then allow citizens who want to attend both meetings. So we haven't heard back from that yet, but obviously it hasn't been quite a month, so hopefully we'll get in the near future.
David is on their agenda today, so I don't know what they talked about at 6, but that's when they were going to discuss it, I think, in open session.
See, if they'd been a half hour earlier, we would have known.
Right.
All right. So any other school board members?
I had the opportunity to participate on a Zoom call. It was kind of an impromptu, I guess, just sharing of experiences in the district. It was after the incident that I think Mark will be talking about his statement on shortly, but it was just basically a group of people came together talking about how they felt about what had happened. And I didn't say a word other than to say who I was there for it. People sharing a lot of things that were difficult to share about their experience in Waunakee, and it was a good start. They're meeting regularly, and they're going to keep meeting. I think they appreciated that there was someone from the school board on it. There was Kristen Runge from the board of trustees for the village was there. Todd Schmidt was participating in it. There are a lot of people who are on the ad hoc committee now who are also participating too. So it was a really good listening session in which everyone did a lot of listening. So that's all.
Any other board members? Then we'll go on to item number 2 under board reports, the ad hoc committee on equity and inclusion. You'll see attached to the meeting a list of the committee membership that Mike and I went over and selected, mainly having to do with the community members and the staff. We do have one more spot for a board member to be on the committee. So if any board member would like to step up for that, let us know. Do you have anything you want to add, Mike?
No, just that as Dave knows this, that there were at least 80 applicants for all these positions, and it was I ended up calling every single person that we ended up selecting and talking to all of them personally. And the thing I noted about all of this is that absolutely everyone who we ended up going with is exceptionally well qualified. I feel that most of the people who are on the committee at this point are far more qualified than I am to be on this. And I told that to all of them, and to the people who are not selected to be on the committee, that doesn't really bear on their quality either, because it was exceptionally hard. And Dave, you can probably attest to this too. Exceptionally hard picking just the people who we put on it, because we could have put 70 on there or any one of those people who weren't put on it, and they would have been great too. So no, I have nothing else to add, but I'm really looking forward to doing the work. And I will be contacting, I think, as we discussed, some of the other people who are not on there as well, to hopefully encourage some people to stay on as alternates too, because it's possible that over the course of this time, people are going to drop off or not be able to continue. So that's all.
I had a reflection as I looked at the 2 attachments regarding the committee. And Mike, maybe it's included in charge 1A through F, but particularly after listening to the communications we've received this week, reflecting experiences of our alumni, I'm wondering if we should have one more item for review. And so I wrote this down. A review of school climate and practices to ensure wellness and belonging and inclusiveness of all students of all backgrounds and identities. So maybe that's embraced in 1A through F, but if it's not, it seems a very important piece that I think is missing. And maybe it's too obvious that it would just happen naturally, but I think there should be something definitive to that effect.
Sure, I think that's a really good point. That's kind of a more, I guess, a broad, all-encompassing term, which I don't have an issue with. The reasoning that we have A through E as they are, those are the current applicable laws that most jurisdictions go through when they're looking at compliance. But, we could always do better than simply what is, I think, a minimum. So if we wanted to add something, I wouldn't be opposed to that at all.
And Dave, I'll fill that last spot if Mike will have me.
I'm good. Okay, so then we'll have Brian be the second BOE member. And obviously it'll be up to Mike about setting up the meetings, and now we can get started.
Was there something that
Mike,
you
I
want?
can email you a written copy of what and phrase it how you want then.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you, Mark.
Super, thanks, Mark.
Yeah, I would expect that the committee, as they start looking at this, is going to have recommendations for what the charge of the committee should be as part of their whole process. So that then kind of naturally rolls into number 3, statement of the board in response, a call for equity. I'd like to thank Mark for drafting this. I had some discussion with Brian also during the month about putting together something like this, and then Mark just wrote it up without discussing. So he was everybody was thinking the same exact thing. So all the board members had this in their packet, and basically, Mark, if you would just like to briefly present it, then we can decide and have a discussion or vote on it.
I drafted this obviously in the wake of the death of George Floyd and the responses throughout our communities and neighboring communities, asking us to really reflect on what we do and what we don't do. And I felt, this is such an important piece of where we're going with our equity value that to remain silent in the wake of some of our students' behavior numbed me. And I felt somehow we need to make a statement where we are as a board, have the students see it, share it with the community. And so this is a draft of thought that I thought would reflect well with where we're going. But it was meant to stimulate thought among the board if they had a better statement that they wanted to make, if I missed something in here. But clearly, I think we need to say something to our student body, to our community as a whole, what we really stand for.
Any further
Mark, I
discussion?
appreciate what you've written, and I think I don't have anything that I would change. I think you've hit a lot of the points very well, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Is there a motion then that we should release this statement?
I make the motion that we
release.
release it.
Okay,
Second.
Jack
Second.
and Judy. Any further discussion? All those.
Dave, where are we thinking of releasing this to? Where will it be printed?
I would think we would send it to the local paper. We would state it as a press release and we put it up on our website,
Okay.
the school district website.
I guess my only thought is, are we saying what we feel is necessary to be said, or are we considering enough what people might necessarily want to hear? And I'm not saying we shouldn't say the statement. I think it's great. It was better than anything I would have drafted. But when I did run this by a couple of people, the things that a couple of people said to me, and these are people who are on the ad hoc committee, was they noted that it just says excessive use of violence. And one of the specific things that they said was, why does it just say violence? When what we're talking about here was a specific kind of violence, and it's state violence or police violence against people. And we haven't had it yet, but other districts have, and I'm anticipating we're going to hear about the issue of law enforcement and law enforcement being in school. So I'm not suggesting we change any of the language here, but I guess I'd like to hear any others' thoughts on what exactly we're saying, because everyone's against violence and racism for the most part. But it's a more specific issue to the people who are specifically affected by it. I don't have anxiety when I see a law enforcement officer in the schools, but there are students that legitimately do. So I'm just putting it out there because that's something that I've already been told was a concern specifically about our response, the village's response, and what all elected officials are saying.
Actually, I believe I do refer to the excessive use of force, not just violence. I did not intend to nor wish to target the police. That wasn't my purpose. I do view that police have a significant issue in this area, but as some of the speakers have noted in the last couple of days, it's not the majority. There are some, there may be many, but it's not all. And I didn't want to paint with a broad brush against that particular group.
I would concur with Mark. I don't think at this point we want to target the police force because, like any organization, you've got some bad apples, and I think there's a lot of good ones out there as well.
Right, and I'm not saying we should. That's not my suggestion. It was. I'm merely saying that what we say and how we say it is noted, and we have to be careful because I don't think that was the intent at all, to make it look like we're not talking about the actual issue. I think Mark took it head on and wrote it better than I would have. But I'm aware of, especially with the ad hoc committee, every precise use of my words might get turned in the least charitable light, and that was a surprise to me, and I just wanted to put that out there.
I think that's well noted, Mike. I spent a long time putting this together, a lot of thought, and I don't believe it's perfect. Nuance is important, and it's difficult to put anything out there that someone may not take the way you intended. So I did the best I could. If someone has something more they'd like to add to it, I'm certainly open to that.
I think if you put something in there on the police, you're going to lose support for the school because there's a section of the community that support the police.
Are we to the point where we call a question on this? Have we done discussing it, or where are we on this?
Judy, if you want to make a motion to call the question, you can do that.
Yes, I do. I make the motion to call the question.
There's a motion to call the question. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second to call the question. That's non-debatable. So we're just voting whether to close discussion and move on to voting on this particular item. So for those who want to close discussion, say aye.
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 Those who want to keep the discussion open, say nay. And so we've closed the discussion. So now we go directly to a vote on approving this statement. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. And we have adopted the statement. And Randy, that should be all right to put it under the board's letterhead and send it to the paper as a press release and then post it on the website.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you.
All right, that's item number 3. Now we're on to item number 4. A formal flag resolution submitted by Mike Brandt for our consideration is to adopt the following resolution. Therefore, be it resolved that the Waunakee Community School District recognizes the month of June as LGBTQ Pride Month and will fly the rainbow flag at its buildings during June to inspire equity, create alliances, celebrate diversity, and establish a safe environment in our schools and community, and that this resolution be distributed to every school in the district.
I love this. Thank
It's
you.
submitted by Mike, so we just need a second,
Second.
and there is a second. Any discussion? Sorry, Joan, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, I just love that we're doing this. I hope that it is, that we are doing it at all schools. I saw plural in there, so I hope that's the case and so needed. And I just really appreciate Mike doing this. Thank you.
I believe, Mike, you said you even have a sponsor for the flags to provide them to the district?
I do. The idea came from a donor who had donated a good amount of money to one of the local community organizations. I think it might have been either like Waunakee or Waunafest, which has been canceled. And he's sitting there with a bunch of money and said, well, I need something to donate to. How about Pride Month for the school? And I didn't know whether or not we had one and looked it up, and lo and behold, we hadn't. And there were many other districts passing the same. So I got the language for this from another district who was kind enough to share with me, and I adapted it for Waunakee. And that's pretty much it.
Very good, Mike. Nice job.
Thanks, Mike.
There's heavy plagiarism in there if anybody looks up for other districts, so I didn't write it.
Any further discussion? So the motion then is that we will recognize the month for LGBTQ Pride, and we will get a rainbow flag at each of the buildings for the month of June. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say no. And the motion passes.
Mike, do you have the flags yet? Do you know?
No, these are different flags. No, I don't have them yet, but I'll either have I'll have someone contact you, or I can just get them to the office, I guess.
All right, super. Thank you.
All right, so now on to item 10, COVID-19 updates and recommendations.
All right,
So that's you, Randy.
that's me. I would agree. Thanks, Dave. What I'm going to do here tonight is walk through a number of pieces with regards to COVID-19, and we have. Wow. Oops, I'm going to go backwards as I was working on this until just after 6 o'clock, and I didn't reorder my slides, so I'm going to go back. First of all, end of the school year. The first thing we want to look at is tomorrow is our official end of the year with our students and staff.
Well, I'm in the middle of a Zoom meeting, so I can't talk. So thank you.
All right. And I just want to say thank you to our parents, staff, admin team, and the board for, particularly we look at the last number of months have been really under unprecedented times, trying to find our way through a pandemic and looking at how we can do things in the interest of our kids. And I know as we've progressed the last few months, there hasn't been agreement on absolutely everything we've done. So I can assure you that we've tried to do that with the best interest of our students and our community in mind. And I appreciate all of our staff and the board for helping with that walk, and certainly our parents who have been fantastic contributors and partners in making this happen for our students. One of the last things we have as we close down the school year, and it's often it is my favorite event of the year, is graduation. Unfortunately, that's not happening in the way that we normally see it occur. I've talked to Brian Borowski today, and our virtual graduation will take place on June 13th. We have contracted with a group to help us with that. There will be a link on our website that will go live on June 13th at 7 p.m. And we will push that information out to the community so that people who are able to find that link and then celebrate our students who are part of that virtual graduation. Part of graduation is obviously kids receiving their diplomas. Usually what happens is at our graduation ceremony, we provide them with their diploma cover, and then following graduation, they go to our office and they pick up their actual diploma. To not hold up the distribution of diplomas, those will be sent out this week once the school year is completed and we've affirmed the students who have met those obligations. August 1st right now we have set as a tentative time that hopefully we can do something more personable in person with some of our students who are willing and desire to do so. Certainly we can distribute their diploma covers as an opportunity for them to pick those up, and then pictures, etc. Brian and I discussed this today, and some of the details are yet to be determined, particularly as we see what we're going to be able to do come the later parts of July and 1st of August as far as what's allowable for bringing students back. We also know that there are some students that are going to choose to, once they have their diploma, they see their virtual graduation, will move on, whereas others are still going to want to totally utilize the opportunity to have some of those momentous pictures and hopefully have some things that kind of bring closure to their career here in Waunakee. So we'll communicate that out to make sure everybody has that information, but those are the pieces that are in the works. End of the school year is also coming, where we're doing a staff, parents, and student end of the experience survey. So that will be going out. Some parts of that went out today and the others will go out in the coming days. And then that feedback will be certainly pieces that we're utilizing as we do our planning for the fall. So that's really where we're at the end of the school year. Where are we sitting with regards to COVID-19, and what are some of the things that we are looking for? The forward Dane plan right now, we are in phase 1. We are coming up on that 14-day time period from where we stepped into phase 1. That 14-day time period is actually tomorrow. I do not anticipate us moving to phase 2 tomorrow. In the meetings I've had with public health, they are trying to make sure that they have an actual 14 days of hard data before they make that decision. And right now there is a lag of a few days for all of the data to come in. So I anticipate by the end of this week, there will be some, as long as those metrics are met, which I am anticipating from everything that I've heard, it's moving in the positive direction, we potentially could be moving into phase 2. Once that occurs, then we will receive an additional order that will provide us the guidelines for all of the industry sectors, including schools, as far as what's allowable under that phase. That is a really big piece that we are waiting for right now, because it should give us some clarity as far as what's occurring. The most recent updates we have at this point are really some specific Dane County orders or guidelines, but we also have the interim infectious control and mitigation measures. That was a DPI document, DHS document that was really modified from the CDC. We received that on May 21st. I'm anticipating that as we move into phase 2, some of those guidelines are going to start to shift. So our best information that we have for planning purposes is still coming. And that's some of the pieces that we are certainly waiting on. The Department of Public Instruction and the Department of Health Services are working on a Wisconsin reopening roadmap. In a meeting I was in on Friday, anticipated delivery time of the draft of that is 2 weeks. Other guidelines we're waiting on are some things with regards to personal protective equipment for staff and students, nursing protocols, and revised information on transportation. A piece that I spent a little bit of time on here today, and it's just really an arising issue, is kind of what's happening with co-curriculars. This is the time of the year that when we start looking at summer, you have different levels of contact with our athletes and our coaches. Certainly as we move into phase 2, there's going to be some guidelines on that. But DPI and WIAA are also working on some things that should hopefully give us at least some guidelines or at least some pieces to help us make decisions about the fall. So those two are still to come. One of the big pieces I want to talk about tonight, and it's really a follow-up to the last time we were together at the end of May, is summer school. And I'm going to kind of walk through a few pieces. I do have a recommendation here and a few slides, but I'm going to walk us through kind of the information, the decision-making points. So if you can just bear me a little latitude to kind of explain where we're at. First of all, the first session, as we announced at our last meeting, will be virtual. We are hoping to do some things where we can, or not hoping, we are planning to do some pieces where many of the programs that are being put out there have some materials or interactive kits that kids can utilize. So it's not solely just in front of a screen and a response to a virtual world, but actually having some pieces that we have that kids can interact with. Sheila and the staff are in the process of working on that. I did run this past public health because we just did our pickups and drop-offs of materials. And what I'm looking for here was I needed some guidelines as far as how could we distribute our materials and kits out for summer school. Public health identified that as an essential function of our business and will allow us to do that. And we're going to do that at Prairie Elementary. Right now, the plan is to use the cafeteria, and we have a maximum number of people that we can have in that space. And with the appropriate PPE and some other provisions, we should be able to do that over a 2-day time frame. So that will be forthcoming. The other piece we talked about at the last board meeting was, what about second session of summer school? And do we have some opportunities to bring some kids back? I think we do, and I want to have a moment to talk about that in a minute. But I think the questions just to kind of put into your mind as far as what we need some guidance on and where we have to make decision points is, first of all, do we want to bring kids back in July? Second in place, if we are going to do that, which programs would we include? And then we have to look at some of the operational protocols, wellness checks, face coverings, and transportation. And I'm going to hit each one of these as we kind of move forward. Now, when you look at what's happening in the general landscape around the state, most districts are keeping their entire summer school virtual. And I did some searching through the Madison area. Certainly, that is a direction that is occurring. The Milwaukee area has very similar. The Fox Valley and different places are very similar to that. I would say that we have probably one of the more robust summer school offerings in the state. So it's solely not just built off of remedial. It has a lot of enrichment and other things that engage kids. So we are similar, but yet a little bit different. At the last meeting, or in the memo I sent to the board that's included in the packet, I outlined really two pieces, that we have really two options as far as we go back to in the second part of July. One is we make a decision that we want to remain virtual and we don't want to bring our students back. And that's certainly a piece that some districts have done. They've done it for the reason of really feeling like their focus needs to be on the fall. The piece that I see that's also kind of a drawback to that is I do believe that there will be some parameters that will allow us to do some things. I think there are some programs that we may want to consider offering that in the absence of us doing them in person just cannot occur. And there's also a piece for us to start to put in place the protocols that we know we're going to need to do in the fall as a way to really kind of learn from some of the things this summer. So it's certainly not trying to do a test run, but certainly there's things that we can learn from anything we do this summer. Some other programs that we could do that we would recommend for that would be Camp Kindergarten and ESY, which is Extended School Year Services for some of our special education students. Other programs that we have out there is creating a new program for Welcome to Fifth Grade, because our fourth graders didn't get a chance to visit their school before they would be moving to the intermediate school. Some of our remedial classes, 7-12. And then weight training was one that has been kind of on my agenda, and then I pulled it off just because of trying to navigate how many programs we can actually manage well. The piece that came to my attention today as these discussions have kind of evolved is different options that might be there, and just some, I guess, congruence areas between schools and other places in our community. So certainly you have health clubs that are opening up with limitations. You also have the Village Center opening up with limitations. And this is something that we could think about in respect to how anything we do within our weight training or fitness areas have similar type ramifications or similar type approaches. I also realized today that as we start to move into phase 2, there's going to be rules on our recreational programs. And that's really and that's where our sports programs are going to fall. So if they're going to allow things like, and we'll see what happens in the second phase, softball games at the park. I mean, if that's something that's allowed, it's going to then permeate into kind of how do we want to deal with any of our extra and co-curricular activities as they start to prepare for the fall. Our programs do have, I believe, 5 contact days that they are allowed during the summer months. And that's a piece I know when I talked to Aaron May and one of our coaches today that they're certainly interested in. And they're thinking about how they could do that safely. And then when I talked to Brian Borowski today, he reminded me that we also have driver's education. Certainly a piece that we have a handful of our kids that they're looking for a space that they could meet with half dozen kids or so to help forward some of the driver's education programs. So when I look at really what my memo focused on was the all virtual, and then the second option being Camp Kindergarten and ESY. The other options I have here really just start to expand the scope. And the piece that I want to take some time to really study is how quickly, should we and how quickly can we start to expand our scope of where we would offer opportunities. The problem I have right now is, as I sit today, the best guidelines I have are from the 21st of May. I know that there's additional guidelines coming out from DHS and DPI, and I know once we go into phase 2 that Public Health Madison-Dane County is going to have very specific school guidelines that will definitely inform some of the work that we're doing. So, and just to kind of hit on a couple other things, you've already seen this slide or something similar. These are some of the protocols that we know we have to work on, whether it's for this summer or fall, and they're in process as we speak. Hygiene, cleaning, protective measures, how we have to train our staff, looking at what options we have for employees, for our students, social distancing, staff needs, etc. Those have to be part of any plan that we have. And so when we look at the aspects of bringing students back, these are pieces that I would need to bring back to you to show you exactly what we're planning to do. So here's where we come to really a recommendation and a place where I need some feedback from you. And when I say administrative thoughts, I'll state that these are really my recommendations tonight based on a plethora of conversations that I've had with different administrators around our district who are in charge of really starting to put those protocols in place. The first thing I would say is a return in July with students requiring extended school year. And this is something that I know Kurt Ely has talked to me about. We have some of our special education students that we need to provide some extended school year services, just based on kind of where we've been over the last number of months. This is not a lot of kids. This is probably less than 10. And it would be in either individual or in very small groups. So this one really doesn't give me concern. It's definitely an area that I think we need to address. The second part is, and as in my memo, you could see an option for how we could bring Camp Kindergarten back. Sheila looked at the last 2 weeks of summer school, where we could take 3 classrooms at each elementary school and run an AM and a PM, and then have some cleaning and sanitation happening between those groups. The reason we chose Camp Kindergarten here, I think, one, it's certainly a program that services well our youngest learners as they start to kind of become familiar with now a building that they're going to be entering in the fall, hopefully. And it's also a piece that in the absence of us doing this in person, this part doesn't happen. And I've heard from parents that this is obviously a very valuable piece. And I've perceived that this is certainly a program that if we were going to try to do some things face to face, that this is one that parents would like us to do. I would see all other programs at this point remaining virtual. The transportation question, transportation for summer school is optional for us to provide. I think just given the challenges, the cost, and some of the logistics of it, I would recommend at this point we do not provide transportation this summer. And then I'm going to need your feedback tonight on wellness checks and face coverings, and we'll come to that in a few minutes. So that's my next slide. Once we move into phase 2, what I would like to do is be able to review what those guidelines are going to be, and then bring back a plan that's going to include how we're going to address extended school year in Camp Kindergarten. I'd also like to have the latitude to start to look at what other pieces are we ready for and what may make sense for us to be able to also potentially bring back. I mean, I had someone talk to me just about some of the fitness pieces, that some of that could be done outside. It could be done with great social distancing. So I want to kind of see what our latitudes are and what options we may have within those guidelines, and then our ability to really effectively manage those and be able to implement those with fidelity. Once we have a direction on some of the programs we would like to address, we also want to do a survey, a very targeted survey to the parents who would be involved in those, and also a staff survey. Because staffing, as we start to look at this and bringing kids back, we certainly need to make sure that we can address that as well. So my administrative thoughts here are extended school year in Camp Kindergarten. Everything else remains virtual, no transportation, and then some feedback from the board on the wellness checks and face coverings. Us to bring back at our June 22nd board meeting, which would be our second board meeting this month, with what that plan would look like, and then latitude from the board to once we review the guidelines that we receive in phase 2, to see what else may fit within this model and within different timelines. So what I want to kind of now bring to your attention is kind of some of the decision points. One of these is certainly, do we return in July? 2 is your feedback on transportation. And when we look at wellness checks, there's going to be greater clarity coming out, I believe, in some of our next guidelines on this. But in very simplistic terms, there's 2 ways to go. There's temperature checks at the door, where you take everyone's temperature and you make an assessment. If it's above 100.4, then they're not allowed into the school. If it's less than that, then they are. There's also a piece of self-reporting where we do some work with our parents, and there's a protocol we would put in place where either temperatures are taken at home, and there's some other checklists as far as the wellness of the child coming to school. The piece with this, and this is a big part for us tonight, is if the board felt like we needed to move forward with the temperature check piece, we have a need to purchase some of the thermometers. There is a lead time with trying to get those. I know John Kramer has reached out and ordered some. I believe it took him 5 or 6 weeks to receive a few of them, but we do not have enough thermometers right now within our system to be able to effectively do this when we come into the fall. And I think anything we do this summer is certainly going to be protocols we're going to build upon for the fall. One of the things to think about as a drawback to the temperature piece is as for some of the research, that 35 to 40% of people are asymptomatic. And talking with, just having some of the conversations that I've had on the state level, there's certainly things that we do to take care of our kids when they're not feeling well, things like Tylenol that obviously mask temperatures. The self-reporting piece is something that would require some cooperation from home, and then also having to reflect of kind of who they've been in contact with and if there's anybody who's been sick in the house. And then there's a reporting and a record keeping piece. The last piece we need some feedback on is face coverings. And I think this is one that there's going to be better guidance coming out. Certainly we can address this with staff as far as their need to have it. It's also a question with regards, and I've seen different models for students, some of which have required it for all students. Some of them have really created a kind of a grade or an age kind of category and saying for our youngest learners, it's recommended but not required because of the challenges of keeping it on children. And then certainly we have kids with disabilities, of which some of this would be very, very difficult for them to maintain just based on their disability needs. So this is the point that kind of my talking here tonight has been the preamble for, is really needing some feedback kind of based off of the thoughts and recommendations that I've laid out there. But certainly these are some of the discussion points that I'd like your feedback on. So with that, I'm going to open it up, Dave, to the board to really kind of see where you would like us to kind of start to put some of our efforts and your thoughts. If you want us to start looking at bringing some of our students back, I need some feedback as far as it may be the best way to approach it is kind of, is there anything that's kind of a non-negotiable for you? That as you see these things, you're saying, you know, temperature checks are non-negotiable for me. If that's part of the plan, I don't like it. Or self-reporting may be the same thing. I just need the board's input on some of these pieces to kind of see where we can start to frame up our planning.
So any board member have questions based on the presentation or comments?
I think the temperature check, I'm not sure how effective that is. And probably the most effective is going to have the personal protective equipment, the face coverings for both staff and students, because this is really transmitted through water droplets and things like that, or coming out of your voice. So, you know, that, you know, out of all of this, that is probably, you know, the most effective from what I've seen and read. And getting thermometers is going to be very difficult. You know, I don't know how many you need, but that's going to be a major challenge for you.
John, were you able to receive any of those thermometers yet? Those scans?
Yeah, I did receive the 2 that I ordered. And I ordered 2 just so I could check the consistency across the 2 as I did some testing. And
how many of those are you going to need, Randy?
Yeah, and that's the piece that we're trying to look at. I mean, Kurt's been working with the nurses just trying to get a sense of kind of the logistics if you did temperature testing. The initial thought was it would take probably a minute for every kid in order to administer them. And there may be some that may be a little bit longer because there may be some that you have, if the kid is moving or just kids being kids, it may slow down some of the process. So we're not really sure how many we're going to need. Part of it is how fast you can get kids through. We haven't gone down the road of actually diving into the purchasing piece because we really wanted to see kind of on a level of process, you know, what the feedback is, and then we can kind of move forward with that. But certainly you're going to have multiples per building so that you can effectively move kids in and out in a timely manner.
What's the cost of the thermometers?
John, what was your cost of some of those thermometers that you purchased?
They're consumer grade medical devices. They're $100 a piece.
Whoa. Oh, I think we should go to self-monitoring. give parents a criteria of when you send your kid and when you keep them home, and put it back on the families.
With all the preparation that we're doing, and I think it's wonderful, and all the options, is there any question of liability for all of this? I mean, we've got processes in place, but are they expecting the school to be 100% on being effective?
That's a great question, Judy. I mean, Steve has looked into our liability with our insurance carrier, and I've also was part of a meeting last week with an attorney who really gave her opinion on how liability falls with the school district in COVID. They both had the same answer: is if there's an order that's placed out there, so an order from like the forward game plan that articulates what we need to do, we need to follow that plan, and we can't deviate from something that's required. However, there may be pieces, and wellness checks is going to be an example. And everything I've heard from public health is it's not going to be a one option is what you're required to do. They will give us multiple options. Really, two that I believe are going to be on there are the temp checks and the self-monitoring. As long as you are staying with something that is within their guidelines, then your insurance carrier will be covering you. But if, for example, they were to say you have to do wellness checks and we decided we weren't going to do any, then that would cause a liability for us. So,
Okay.
Steve, do you have anything to add to that from what you've learned through your insurance discussions?
No, I would just echo what Randy said, that we did receive communication from our insurance company that we are covered. We are covered for COVID, related topics, but they specifically included in the information that we do have an obligation to follow, any orders or guidance that comes out. And as Randy's saying, like with the wellness check piece, it's an either or situation. As long as we are actively participating in either of those scenarios, we would have coverage. But if an entity, a school entity, chose to do neither, then there would be a liability that would exist because we are not following the order/guidelines that are currently out there. So as long as we stay within the parameters of what is being shared with us, we have full coverage from our insurance carrier for any COVID-related issues. So great question.
Randy, maybe I'm hearing wrong, but I sense there's a support administratively for the self-reporting from home just because of the, not just because, but the metrics of checking temperatures of 600 kids could be really challenging in any one school. You're still going to need temperature scans for each school, and I would encourage you to order whatever you consider enough to do that if we're going to go with the home monitoring. I guess my question, whether doing home or school scanning, what does it mean if I come to school with a temperature of 101 today? That's not uncommon for the last, how many kids have that happening? Are they now being treated for a 2-week kind of quarantine because it could be COVID, or are they just going home for the day? What's the next piece with that?
That's an awesome question, Mark, because that's a piece that, that would spark where you would not be allowed in school. And then part of what I would see is we have to have as part of our protocols, when I go back to this slide, part of what we have to have and part of those policies is what do we do with that? And now part of that we'll get guidance from public health on, because anytime you have communicable diseases and all of those things within the schools, we are going to have, that is kind of their expertise to help provide us on what do we need to do. I mean, it may be a situation where if they have a COVID test and it comes back negative, then we just treat them like they normally would with, because they have a fever. But I think those are all the pieces that still have to be vetted out. So when I tell you about like the operational protocols, that's what we have to have in place. So we're not building it on the fly when that happens, because that absolutely will occur. We look at kids this summer who are going to have hay fever. and they're going to have different things. They get a stomach ache. They get things that just because we work with kids are going to happen. And we have to try to determine how can we kind of work with that in a reasonable way that also keeps us safe. So that's part of the protocols we need to put in place. And that's also what I'm hoping are some of the guidance that we can receive, particularly as we work with public health over the coming weeks.
So if you place an order, for a number of thermometers, can you cancel? Is there a cancellation clause, or if you're preparing, because it sounds like it's going to take about 4 weeks before you really get guidance on this, and if they come back and say you've got to temperature check all the people coming in.
I think, Jack, I'll have guidance from public health by next week. So I think I'll have at least the guidance for phase 2 of our forward Dane plan that will have a segment on school. That's what I'm anticipating and hoping for. And from the conversations I've had, that's what I think will happen. And that'll give us some of the guidance of what we're looking for. But and just from those dialogues, I believe we're going to get some options, such as this. There'll be a requirement to have wellness checks, and then options underneath that of how we meet that requirement. But to your point, there is a point where we probably do need some additional thermometers in the district, just as a way to make sure that we're addressing things as they occur effectively within our health rooms.
Right, I would agree. I think that, you might as well go ahead and order a couple for each school at least. Even if there's a vaccination, this is going to carry on for a little bit, for a while beyond. But to go back, we sort of jumped to 3, but to go back into 1, when I read our notes for the meeting, I think it's a great idea if we're in phase 2 to bring back students in some level, and using social distancing and whatever guidelines they're putting. We are going to need to see how this is going to work on a smaller level before we get into the fall. And I think it's very important that our young students can get into a school, and the ones that need to continue over the summer do so as well.
So you'd support, Brian, really the part that I was pointing to here, the extended school year and the camp kindergarten approach?
I do, as long as we're staying within the guidelines and social, and the distancing.
And I would concur with that as well, because, as you indicated, what you can do is really test out the procedures, cleaning, and what are the unforeseen things that you haven't thought about in your Zoom meetings, and how effective are these things going to be? How long is it going to take? All of that kind of stuff is going to be ferreted out through that time.
Randy, if I could address Jack's previous question from a few minutes ago about canceling our orders if we were to buy PPE and for some reason we change our plans. Just a quick comment that we've had vendors cancel on us. We just had cases of hand sanitizer canceled. We have none coming now. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that, but I'm scrambling now for hand sanitizer. We've had our orders delayed up to 3 months for our ionization spray units that we're sanitizing with. So I think it goes the other way, that the vendors and resellers will cancel on us when we order PPE. That's been my experience.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right.
And as far as the transportation, we're not required to. I think, again, it would be smart for us to just not even consider that this summer.
So do you basically have what you need, Randy?
Well, and let me just move on to the last one. From the PPE perspective, certainly we can work with kind of what the recommendations are there. And certainly they're probably going to give us some latitude with students and staff. I don't anticipate it being a hard required, but I think what I have certainly heard, and I think has been a growing piece here, is that is an effective way to mitigate the transmission of it. So I guess what I would ask for is, as we start to put these protocols in place, for us to be able to work within the guidelines that we have and continue to bring this piece back at the June 22nd meeting. But I would value any opinions that the board has with regards to face coverings for staff and students. Right now, when you look at like daycare guidelines, they are recommended for staff and they're silent on kids. Now that's a little different model based on being the youngest, really little kids. But certainly I could see something similar occurring where it's going to be a recommendation, but not a requirement. And certainly that's going to fall to us locally to see what we think about it. So I guess I'd value your opinion on face coverings with regards to any plans we put together.
My only concern if it's mandated is how do you enforce it? And yet, if we make it optional, is it meeting the needs of our staff and students for protection's sake?
Right. Yep.
Yeah, I guess I'm for, I mean, I still wear my mask if I'm going inside to any store in this area. You know, we're going to have people that are going to be going to other states over the weekend, coming back. You know, I think we should start with everybody wearing them because people are going to travel around this summer. And I think we just need to be precautions for everyone. You know, we're going to have people on all sides of the spectrum not wanting to wear them, and if we don't require it, I can see that the parent's going to want their child to wear them, but as soon as they show up and see no one else wearing them, it's coming right off their face. So, and then you have to put that on the staff to monitor that.
I mean, Brian, your comments are spot on as far as, I mean, I've received messages from parents that have been adamant that that should be part of our protocol. And I've received input from parents that are very much opposed to that. And I think that's similarly to what we see just in practice out and about in our communities. So I think it's a matter of we have to start with our planning kind of with a standard and then kind of work from there. So Brian's kind of posing the idea that everybody would be required to wear them. I guess I'd value to hear what some of the other board members think.
I really agree with Brian saying that. I'm glad he said it before I did. I mean, the way that, I mean, I have younger kids, so I think it's a little bit harder than what a lot of parents might have to deal with. I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. You may have seen them coming and sitting next to me at some point during this meeting because they don't like to listen sometimes. And that's just the way it is. But what we are doing right now is they don't generally go out very much, but when they do, they have to have their masks and they're prepped for having to be used to wearing them more often. But what we are telling them is, you know, you're not unsafe just because you're wearing this. It's meant to keep you safe and to take care of other people, and we care about other people, and that's why we do it. So it's not ideal to have people wearing a face covering when they're meant to interact with other people, but it's a reality that other countries, other continents have lived with for decades, and it's new to us here. So I'm 100% in favor of requiring them until we get the all clear from someone saying that they're not necessary anymore. So that's my message, is get used to wearing them and get over it and move on. And hopefully one day they won't be needed anymore.
So if somebody comes without a face covering, are we going to have ample supply to supply the kids
and
with
that's
face covering?
That's part of why the question is here, so that we can work on that. And I know that there are some options that I can tap into to get some. I did hear an opinion the other day that a face covering could be viewed as, just like we have a supply list for kids to bring supplies, that would be something that they would be required to have. And in the absence of a kid who isn't able to have supplies, we provide them for them, or we find a way to do that. So I think that'll be something that we'll have to work on, which is part of why we posed the question here tonight.
Are they available? Just like thermometers, you know, are they available? I guess that would be a question.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of getting to kind of what type of face covering you're talking about. But certainly there's models out there where there's some that are being made. I know there was a local business that was providing them to our grocers and to our families at our food pickup. So those would be some places that I might start.
When you talk face coverings, are you talking masks or shields? You know, I know that local businesses making those shields.
Probably talking the masks for the kids and the staff. It may get into shields when you start to get into like and yet to be determined, but maybe into our health room for a nurse or something. But I would say it's more of the face coverings like you see when you go to the store.
Because I would submit that shields would be acceptable as well. Mm-hmm. And they're probably safer than masks because they're collecting all of the, you know, COVID or whatever, you know, before it goes through. There's probably some studies out there that indicate that.
Yeah, I think your wording is face covering, so I think that would cover that as well.
Yep.
I was just making sure.
And gloves and face masks are pretty easy to get nowadays. It wasn't a month ago, but you can get them.
Yep.
So it seems we have some unanimity that for at least this summer session, a requirement for face coverings. And in a weird way, you know, these classes are optional. So if some parents find it, for whatever reason, they don't want to do that, you're not required to go to summer school. And we can see how the level of compliance and how it works. But it seems like our initial thought is to make it mandatory for the summer school, and then we can make a decision about the fall.
Right. So what I would say, just to kind of review, I would look at extended school year. I'd look at the camp kindergarten starting on those last 2 weeks in July. Everything else stays virtual, no transportation. The wellness checks, what I heard was to take a look at the self-monitoring approach, but also look at ordering some thermometers so that we have a supply in our schools, which I think makes good sense. Requiring face coverings for staff and students. And I just wanted to reiterate then, as we get the guidelines from phase 2, we'll start to put those together into our protocols. And I'd like the latitude from the board to be able to, as we look at those guidelines, see what else may fit within that, particularly as I start to look at what else I'm going to have coming, particularly when I get into July and August. I have all of those different co-curricular pieces. I have to start figuring out what that's going to look like per the guidelines that are coming out.
Yeah, I would also add that if we are looking at this as sort of a trial basis, that if we have these thermal scanners, we might as well try them out at a school or two just to see what it takes and how long it takes.
Okay.
And Randy, so this, just to be clear, this is basically officially making the second session of summer school entirely virtual, correct?
It's making everything virtual except for, yeah, we would reintroduce the camp kindergarten piece for those parents. I think whoever brought it up, but this is optional for who would like to participate with the protocols that we would put in place. It would also be for the extended school year. And then I think as I receive those phase 2 guidelines, I think I want to give some consideration to, are there other things that we should be thinking about that can that we're going to have to start to reintegrate in as we start to move into the school year. So yes, the answer to your question is yes, other than the exceptions I've identified.
Okay. Do we know whether or not people who are enrolled in that can still pull out with any, I don't know what the consequence is. I know the date you're supposed to drop earlier for the first session was last week, and I know that because I was one of the families that pulled out of it.
Yep.
So I don't know if they could still do that for later sessions.
No. Sheila, I know you're in the meeting tonight. Can I just have you kind of talk about the, kind of to Mike's question about ability to kind of unenroll from something if they choose to?
So nobody is enrolled right now in Camp Kindergarten because Camp Kindergarten during registration times was really set up to be a first session in person, a second session in person. We will be running a very brief, quick registration. It isn't for all of second session at all. So it's clear, it's blank, everybody can choose to opt in. And we need to have clear communication to parents about what does that look like in regards to some of those decisions or guiding pieces that the board talked about tonight. And parents would have a choice between a 4-day session on July 20th through the 23rd, or the following week, the 27th through the 30th, a morning or an afternoon. So we would send out communication to talk about what Camp Kindergarten now would look like. It's kind of a taste of getting to see the building and getting familiar with it. But nobody, all of those registrations were put to the side, and we'll do it through our program. Should be pretty quick and easy to do, but we'll have to have all the communication and protocols decided ahead of time so that parents can make the choices they want to.
All right. That seems, I guess, Dave, what I'd like is if the board would just kind of approve that plan, which is generally kind of what I have laid out here. And then with the guidelines that you provided with the self-monitoring and the PPE, that would give us what we need to continue moving forward. And then as we have our second meeting this month, once we set it, I've proposed June 22nd, we'll bring back the guidelines that we've developed up to that point, and also anything else that we feel might make sense and be reasonable with the phase 2 guidelines.
So is there a motion to approve that?
I motion that we approve the plan articulated by Randy.
Second.
So Mark and second by Jack. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. And we can move on to number 2.
I'm going to keep moving here. Couple things just to give you. One of the things I shared that I was going to give you tonight was an update of what we're doing with planning for the fall. I've provided in your packet a document that really starts to outline some of our guiding principles. And I mean, we've already started to talk through some of these things. It just starts to hit those pieces that as we start to put our plans together, and it impacts summer, but it's really guided to the significant lift of work we have for the fall. First one just deals with trying to say we are going to be referring and utilizing those guidelines as they're provided from the CDC, DPI, DHS, and Dane County that help to keep our students, staff, and community safe. Talks about our intent to deliver excellent instructional programs to meet the needs of our kids. It addresses our need to be flexible as we go into our reopening plans. It talks about our being able to enhance our capabilities to provide remote learning, realizing that that may be something that we need to be part of in the fall or sometime next year. Really looking at the well-being and social emotional needs of our families to keep that as a priority. Looking at issues like equity as we start to make decisions and asking ourselves how are different families impacted by decisions we make and different kids impacted by those. Looking to have input from staff and parents and keeping people informed as we walk through all of these processes and then looking at what's realistic and reality for us to be able to achieve. So those are kind of just some guiding principles we've drafted. And I guess I would just ask if there's any feedback from the board on those at a first blush. I think that'll be a piece that we'll continue to bring back to you as we flush out some of our programmatic pieces. But I would value any input that you would have on any of these general guiding principles that we've laid out so far. Is there anything that causes you concern? The first one really is built off of the guidance we receive from those agencies that provide guidance on a health emergency. And then it really starts to move through the pieces that we as a school district value as an instructional entity.
Anyone have any questions?
All right. And the second page of this is really I would say, very bare bones skeleton of our framework. And we've had a chance to see a outline of what is potentially going to be required out of the state as we look at reopening plans. So what we've started to do is really create an organizational structure with different areas and work groups. So you can just see where I've started off with some of our central administrative staff saying, I need people who can be looking at mental health and have Chris Mann put their infectious control and mitigation. Kurt and John certainly look at safety. Special ed being with Kurt. When we start to look at some of the governance and the frameworks, those are some things that I have to pull together as far as how we're going to lead those efforts. And then obviously this piece I have at the bottom, which is building leadership teams. I've asked each of our principals to start thinking about leadership teams that they would put together that include a variety of their staff. I'll be getting them some guidelines out here the next day or so that will encourage them to also have a parent as part of some of these to get some feedback at that level. But as we start to put the protocols together, just as we talked about here a few minutes ago with wellness checks and PPE, we'll put those together at a district level so we have consistency. But then we need to really start working through these different areas of work. And so this is really a foreshadow of some of the things that you'll see coming forward as we start to put plans together for the fall. So tonight, it's really just showing you kind of the body of work ahead of us. And as we receive further guidelines from the state on their reopening plans, some of these may shift, but I think generally they start to hit the high levels of what we're working on. Any questions with regards to that?
The one area I thought of, Randy, was about transportation. Will that fall under Steve and Brian?
Yeah, it's really kind of under the school operations piece. And that's kind of all of those things that fall operationally of how we would do that work. So transportation would certainly fall under there. And
Any
some
other
of these
questions?
are going to shift. I just assigned people to start doing a dive into it so that as we start to mitigate these out, I've asked them to also look at who do you have to coordinate with. Obviously, these are going to require us to coordinate very deeply with other staff and building leadership teams. So it's really kind of a point person is what you're seeing.
Any other questions or comments? Then do you want to go on to the calendar committee?
Yep, that's the last thing here. The last piece I have tonight, and this is an actionable item, we have an approved calendar for the 2021 school year. As we administratively have taken a look at what we need to be prepared with our staff for the fall, regardless of what method of delivery we're going to be in. We feel we need time with our staff to do that work. So I pulled together the calendar committee here just a few weeks ago. We had a discussion of different options that we could do. And what we were able to pull together is moving some of our professional development days that were originally scheduled in October, February, and May, and move those to the beginning of the school year. So what that requires, it doesn't change our contractual obligations, 192 days with our teaching staff. It just shifts some professional development days that we would have throughout the school year and move those to August 20th, 21st, and 24th. And by doing so, it gives us additional days to really be prepared for students on the 1st. So that'll be a combination of professional development time, collaboration time, and planning time for our staff to get ready for students. We had conversations about trying to do some of those things at the close of the school year, and some teams were certainly at that point where they're already thinking forward. Others were in different places where they were focusing on things to close down the year. But I think to bring us all onto the same page, additional time to start the year is important. We did a survey that just gave a couple different options, and you see the results in your packet. The one that was generally preferred by 2/3 of our teaching staff was this option. So I'm asking for your support of this evening to make this modification to our teaching calendar. The days that we're vacating with regards to the PD days, so example, the October 22nd day, where we're moving that now to the front of the year, the staff felt that given the unknowns as far as how the school year will be progressing and how we'll be delivering, to just keep those days on the calendar as non-contract days, otherwise a day off. So that's really what this recommendation entails. It's moving 3 days forward to the beginning of the year, and the days that those are coming from would just remain as days off for students and staff throughout the year. Probably just, and I think it's a good idea to give some breaks as we are kind of going into some unknowns.
So would you
I'll
like
make a motion to accept option 1?
Yep.
Second.
So Brian and then Jack, any questions or discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. And so option 1 is passed.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Before I leave the COVID piece, is there any questions that any board members have? All right. Thank you all. I really appreciate all your support on those items.
Then we're on to committee reports. First is the Budget Committee, which, Jack, I think are there any actionable items?
Yeah, I believe
Adopting
there's,
the second draft?
yeah, we've got to adopt the second draft. And Steve, do you want to take over?
Sure, thank you, Jack. There are quite a few recommendations from the Budget Committee for consideration of the full board this evening. I'll just start with the agenda looking at number 2. Number 2 is an agenda item that requests approval of a formal budget change process that does occur every year in June. There are budget changes included for grants and the state of Wisconsin library aid. I had a note in board book that in a typical year, we would have had more budget changes presented this evening, but it's pretty limited at this point. The budget change document is attached, and the Budget Committee is recommending approval of the budget changes on a 3-0 motion. And I will take any questions on this one before moving on to number 3.
Any questions? Then would we have a motion to accept?
I move we accept the budget changes for 2019-20.
Second.
Mark, and seconded by Joan. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say no. And item 2 is adopted. So number 3.
Okay, so for item 3, I want to make sure I explain the recommendation of the committee. So at the budget committee level, we spent time reviewing a memo that's attached. It's called the Admin Restructuring Planning. So the motion from the budget committee is to recommend approval of the second draft of the budget, but to include the administrative restructuring plan. That plan included some options for how those costs could be covered. The budget committee's recommendation was to fund the cost by a combination of numbers 1 and 2 in the memo. At the budget committee meeting, the administrative restructuring planning was a separate agenda item from the second draft of the budget. We walked through all of the agenda items, and then the committee came back to the second draft of the budget, wanted to attach the administrative restructuring planning, funding it with those options 1 and 2, and then made that motion to bring forward to the board tonight. So I'm happy to go into that. I'm sure Randy would be as well. I'm sure all the board members had an opportunity to read it. So Randy, do you want to just answer questions, or do you want to jump into it a little bit?
Let me just take a high-level overview of what that structuring plan is. If you recall from the previous meetings we've had and from the Goals Committee's recommendation to the board was to move ahead with the communication specialist position that has been outlined and was actually approved for this year, the current year we're in, and wanting to continue to move forward with that position for next year. So we'll do that as soon as this is approved. The second piece was a discussion around adding an assistant principal to Heritage Elementary. That was a piece that, again, we discussed at the board level and was asked to be moved to the budget committee for consideration. As we did that and we created that position, it was also an opportunity for us to have some conversations about the length of contracts for our assistant principals. So it aligns our Prairie Elementary principal from a 200 to a 210-day contract, which is how long the Heritage AP's position would be. And then it would also align our middle school assistant principal from 200 to 238, which is in line with what our intermediate and high school is. Those dates and those contractual lengths were really something that Brian Kubarski and I had conversations about and took a look at our research as far as comparables within our comparable school districts. Another option that was proposed here was to continue to expand on, I guess, some of the efficiencies we could have within our curriculum and instruction department, and taking Tim Schell's position and Amy Johnson's position and directing Tim to be working on the 7-12 area with some additional responsibilities that come along with that. And then Amy focusing in on the pre-K 6 and escalating her position from assistant director to really director of elementary. And the associated costs associated with that. So what we're looking at when he says options 1 and 2, option 1 is looking at some of the delta between staff who are retiring or have chosen to leave the district and new people that we are hiring. We feel that number is anywhere between $125,000 and $200,000. And then other revenue sources such as transfer of service, open enrollment, and other places where we know we have funds that are coming in that are applicable to Fund 10 that we believe between those two things would allow us to accomplish what is in the second draft of the budget, as well as including the administrative restructuring plan. And that was what was reviewed and thoroughly discussed by the budget committee and what was being recommended this evening.
Any questions? My one question, and maybe Brian can answer this, is in the second draft, you had about the tax levy going down 1.3%. Is that still going to be affected like we did last year where we have that special vote to keep the tax levy at 0?
I can jump in on that one.
Yeah.
So what
Thank you, Steve.
Dave is referring to is that the second draft of the budget includes a plan for a debt service defeasance, just like the board approved last October. So the details would have to be forthcoming. Last October, the school board chose to set a debt service defeasance so that the tax rate was consistent from one year to the next. We will not receive information about property value increases until around October 1st or shortly thereafter. So if the board had a similar goal, once we get to October, we would revise the amount of the debt service defeasance to have a consistent tax rate from one year to the next. We can really have that be any dollar amount that reflect goals of the board, and we'd be certainly happy to have that conversation when we get there. For now, we've included the concept of a similar dollar amount to what was done this past October, but that is open for input and revision by the school board once we know what the property value increases are in the community. Does that make sense?
So basically the minus 1.3 really can't be determined until October.
That's correct. It's just an estimate at this point. Yep.
I just don't want the public to see something like this and then say, oh, we're getting a tax cut. And it's like, well, there's no way to really predict it right now. It's just
right.
A guess. All right.
Yep. Great point.
Thanks. In which case I'd entertain a motion to adopt the second draft.
I so move.
Second.
So Mark and Joan, any further questions or discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? And let's see,
Okay, so
fund balance classifications.
agenda item 4 is consideration of the 2020-2021 lease agreements. The budget committee has recommended approving the leases on a 3-0 motion. Please note, per the board's previous decision regarding summer facility use, the summer of 2020 lease for the Wisconsin Youth Company is not included, but the school year lease is. So the budget committee did recommend approving these 3 leases as presented to you this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions any board members have.
Seeing none, motion to approve the lease agreements for 20 and 21.
So moved.
Joan,
Second.
a second by Brian. Any discussion or questions? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 All opposed say no. And now, consideration of fund balance.
So for this agenda item, it is an annual requirement for the school board to approve the fund balance accounts that we use prior to the close of our fiscal year on June 30th. We've attached the fund balance accounts that are being used. The one change is highlighted in yellow, which is a change that is a national accounting requirement change, which basically is moving accounts that were previously classified as student activity account Fund 60 accounts into Fund 21 accounts. The budget committee did review that attachment and is recommending it for approval on a 3-0 motion. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Hearing no questions, is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Brian,
Second.
and seconded by Joan. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. And furniture.
For agenda item 5, we have additional classrooms for the fall at both intermediate school and Heritage Elementary School. Administration was recommending funding those furniture purchases out of unspent transportation funds from the 2019-2020 budget. And at the budget committee, there was discussion regarding the costs. There were a couple of options presented at the intermediate school. We're moving forward for your consideration tonight the option that was recommended by the budget committee. I just added a note in board book that the actual amount of the cost came down slightly from the quote that you see as a result of state contract pricing. We do seek out state contract pricing whenever possible. And in this case, we were able to reduce the quote slightly by converting the contract over to state contract pricing. The budget committee is recommending approving the furniture replacements on a 3-0 motion, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that any board members have on this topic.
Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
I guess I can wait until after the motion. I guess, Dave, my question was going to be, so the proposal is to spend savings that we had from effectively this semester for transportation, i.e. busing, now for this.
That's correct. Yep.
I move that we adopt the furniture purchase.
Second.
So Judy and then Joan. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
No.
And the motion passes. The food service budget.
The next agenda item is regarding the school closure meal program. Taher has provided information regarding an estimate for continuing this program through the summer. We have some information in here about some of the challenges that some of our families have had accessing some of the additional funds that were authorized for districts that participate in the National School Lunch Program. Some of our families have received these funds, some have not. There's definitely been confusion regarding this topic as far as eligibility. The state superintendent sent out a memo that said the additional funds that families were receiving was limited to districts enrolled in the National School Lunch Program. However, Waunakee families have been receiving the additional funds and others have not. The budget committee did ask for some additional information. So we asked Connie Vaco, our food service director, to talk with all of the families on last week, Wednesday and Friday, who were coming in for the school closure meal program. The majority of the families still coming in expressed an interest in continuing to have this program available for them. Connie did want me to share that the numbers today had dropped down to 100 families or 100 meals from families participating in the program. We were around 200 previously. And as the weather has warmed up and we've gotten closer to summer break, the number of meals that we've been providing in this program has been declining to the point where we only had 100 today. So the estimates that you saw included in board book were based on 200 meals a day, which is where we were about a month ago. The program the cost would basically be cut in half if we only had about 100 meals per day instead. So There is interest and there is demand, but it's not like it was 3-4 weeks ago. But the families that are still participating have expressed an interest into it continuing throughout the summer. The budget committee did move this forward to the full board meeting tonight with a recommendation to continue the program through the summer of 2020 only. The reason why that language is in there is we traditionally do not have a food service program operating during the summer. So this is intended to not be precedent setting. This is intended for the summer of 2020 only. And that motion passed 3-0 by the committee. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that board members have on this topic.
Yeah, Steve, how do we know how many families want to continue this, and how do they plan ahead? You know, I mean, if right now it's 100, but it goes to 150, I mean, just can you explain how that works and we're not wasting food? Or
sure. The number of participants has been fairly consistent, which has allowed Connie and her staff to plan ahead for the meals. They have been preparing meals that can last for more than a day. They're using meal choices because we're only doing it 3 days a week. She's preparing food that families can take home, and it is still good for them to eat a day or two later. So it is more based on meals that are not going to perish in a day or so. And she will just continue to adjust based on the number of families participating. And as of right now, it has come down to about half of what it was before. And so in preparation, Connie would just anticipate being around the 100 number that it has been. She actually would expect that it's probably going to drop a little further as families potentially start going on vacations or trips, or as students potentially start work, that it may even decline further. But those who are participating did ask for it to continue and talked about how important it was for them to be able to access this through the school. Connie would just have to continue to monitor really the demand from families for this and to just adjust her food preparation accordingly.
Okay, I think it's a great idea, a great program. I just didn't know if they actually had to sign or commit to receiving these lunches in advance.
Nope, it's just folks who come on that day and we prepare enough for them and plan ahead and basically make sure that the meals that we're preparing can be used for more than one day.
Steve, is there at $12.50 a day? I tried to do the math really quick. By the time we're through the end of summer, you're looking at something just under $100,000.
No. I'm sorry, Dave. I'm sorry to interrupt, Steve. I did a calculation, Steve. If it's the numbers you gave us, it looks to me like 37,000 for the summer. And if it's half that, then it'd be about 19. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, it's not, Dave. You're probably looking at it as a daily program. It's been limited to 3 days a week, and it would be for until school starts. And then that was if it was 200 meals a day. And so we were looking at a high level, potentially like a $40,000 program at 200 meals per day. But it would basically, if the demand drops to 100 meals a day, it probably dropped to 20,000. The committee also asked us about the funds that we've raised through Class Community, and that's at $12,430 already. My guess would be if we put out another request through Class Community, We might even be able to get to the full cost of the summer program by just putting out additional fundraising requests through our class community program. And if the demand drops further, the cost will continue to drop. And one big difference, just as a reminder about the summer as compared to the school year, during the school year, we committed to keeping our staff through TAHR whole with their pay. During the summer, it would only be pay for actual work performed, since we typically do not have a program. So if the demand is lower, then the cost would be lower as well.
So are you saying that labor cost of 400, that's based on actual work performed, but could go down?
Could go down, yes.
It's based on making 200 meals a day.
Yep.
And if it goes down to 100, I'm assuming that labor cost goes down to cut in half as well.
So do we have an idea of how much this program cost us to finish the school year? Because we were counting on some of that class community covering that, because that was an added expense.
Right. I think when you think about the school year, the cost really was in our decision to continue the staff, to continue their salary, and to keep them whole throughout the remainder of the school year. So the time that they were putting in was time that we were already paying for. And the majority of the food that we were using was food that had already been purchased. We typically, of course, purchase food ahead of time, have it in our freezers and ready to be used for the food service program. So Connie redeployed that food towards the school closure meal program. And so I would say the decision for the school year, the costs associated with it are really more related to the decision to continue paying the food service staff their salary through the remainder of the school year, similar to what we did with Lamers. And there really wasn't added costs beyond that for running this program because of that decision. If we had not made that decision, then it would have definitely been a different story.
So you're thinking that basically budgetary wise, we already had that money budgeted. We did not have anything extra we had to cover.
We did not have anything extra because of the decision to pay the staff for their work anyways. However, that decision will result in us having a deficit in our food service budget this year, because the budget is based on paid student meals for out the entire school year. So like all food service budgets throughout the country, this is a major issue that schools are being faced with, is that revenues stopped during the school closure while we made a decision to continue the expenses and to keep the staff whole. So we are going to have a deficit in the Fund 50 program, but it's not due to providing the meals, because we were paying for the labor anyways, and a good portion of the food we had already purchased. It was more related to the decision to keep the staff whole through the remainder of the school year.
So we do have a deficit in Fund 50 that we're going to have to close at some point. And
it is possible that it may be covered from the fund balance that we have within Fund 50. We have a good fund balance in Fund 50 that may be completely utilized for the school closure. Any deficit beyond that would have to be covered by Fund 10, but primarily the bulk of the deficit will be covered by reserve funds that were sitting into the food service budget already. So that's the good news regarding the deficit in Fund 50, is that we had a reserve fund built up and we were able to use it for this. We won't really know until the audit process is over in August as to whether we actually had to support Fund 50 with any Fund 10 funds. It certainly is possible, but thankfully we had a balance in Fund 50 going into the school closure that we're able to tap into to support the board's decision to keep the staff whole.
Does the reserve in Fund 50 affect our bond rating like the reserve in Fund 10? Is that part of it?
That's a great question. I'm going to have to bring this topic of reserves and bond rating back to the next budget committee meeting, because we did receive an update from Moody's in the last week. Fund 50 is not something that they look at. They do not look at Fund 50, and so from the bond topic, that's not a part of it. They focus primarily on Fund 10, and we had a difficult conversation about trying to help them understand what we were doing with Fund 41, but thankfully Fund 50 is not a part of that process.
Okay, my worry here is that when we were first talking about keeping the food program going, we started the class community figuring that that would help us pay for what we were going to do during the school year. I believe part of the reserve in Fund 50, isn't that being used for an equipment purchase in the second budget?
Absolutely.
I think that's why, I think one of the things, a lot of this stuff is going to have to be revisited because as Steve indicated, and this is one of the topics that was brought up during the budget committee, is we really don't have an understanding of where we sit until the audit in August. So, there may be shifts in dollars, as we go.
I gotta say, I'm starting to kind of wish that the furniture purchase was after this discussion, because if that money was from the transportation, maybe we should be putting it towards food service instead of buying furniture that we weren't scheduled to buy at this point anyway. I'm just getting concerned that we're setting ourselves up a little bit.
Yeah, it is a challenge there, Dave, because we don't have all of the hard numbers, and that's why it was suggested to as we talk later in the facilities, moving that purchase of equipment off until we have a better budget picture.
Just a couple of things, Dave. So the transportation savings are going to be in the neighborhood of 125,000 to 150,000, likely closer to 150,000. And the furniture expenditures is a portion of the transportation savings. There's a decent amount remaining. So food service could certainly be a part of that discussion. And absolutely, you're correct about the reserves, and we have been replacing kitchen equipment out of the reserves, and that directly ties into what Jack just mentioned about the facility committee recommendation that's coming to hold off on a repair that was scheduled to be completed in one of our kitchens, or a replacement, excuse me. So yeah, these are all definitely tying in together.
Steve, do you have an update on the class community account?
Yeah, it's a little over $12,430. That was as of when we prepared board book last week.
Randy, maybe you could go to the Waunakee Education Foundation and have this project be put forth to them to help us out.
Yep, thank you, Jack. I'll do that.
All right, is there a motion on the food service budget?
I move we approve the proposal from the budget committee for the food program.
Is there a second?
Second.
So Mark and Joan, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? think Steve is finally off the hook. And we go on to the HR committee. Which is actually not an actionable item, I don't believe.
No, the HR committee is really the readings of the employee handbooks, the first drafts. So I don't know if you have any questions. Brian has worked on these extensively over the past year. I guess before I end, I do have one question, Brian, and I know I brought it up before. Page 18 of the teacher handbook, the normal high school teaching load. I think we want that to say 11 out of 12 instead of 5 out of 6 or 6 out of, or 5. It just, that language is confusing. I think we decided that that should be 11 out of 12.
Joan, I believe that rate at or right after the 12 sections in language. The 5665 was just the numeric of that, but I can strike it totally.
I thought at the committee we had the clarity wasn't there, and the committee wanted that to be reworded as just you can be assigned 11 out of 12 with no additional pay, but if you're assigned 12 out of 12, then you have additional pay.
So, Joan, are you asking for that to be reworded or struck, or?
That was my understanding when it came out of the HR work group, that's how that was going to be worded. I thought that was a recommendation that came out of that group. But, you know, I can live with either words as long as the employees understand what they're being asked to do and when they will receive extra pay.
So I guess I would suggest, is there going to be an HR committee meeting this month?
I don't know. Brian?
You're muted.
Randy, was there thought of having an HR committee meeting this month?
That was the question to Brian. I mean, I think we can probably clarify that one point that Joan has probably without a committee meeting. And I think it's just, it's more semantics than kind of putting some of those pieces together. If I'm understanding the issue correct, Joan.
It is. It's, you know, it's worded that you can teach either 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 6 for one particular pay. It just was cumbersome, and it was suggested, you know, out of the school year, you have 11 out of 12 assignments or 12 out of 12 assignments.
I mean, that's the purpose for having 2 readings of this, for this kind of feedback, so we can take what Joan is offering here and we can take a look at that between now and the next meeting and then bring that answer back. And if there's a adjustment that needs to be made, we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize as I was being dominated by split screens and shared screens and Zoom and unable to unmute myself. Joan, the language that we had talked about at committee was there in total. The only part, the only part in that section split of 6-5 or 5-6 that follows, you know, a teacher may be assigned with no additional compensation, another assignment in lieu of the study hall, resource room, or supervision. The section split of 6-5 or 5-6. If the teacher is assigned 12 classes, 6 and 6, she shall be compensated an additional 8 1/1500%. That the only part that wasn't language that came out of that committee was that I added in parentheses 6.6 to kind of follow the 6.5 and 5.6. The other parts had been vetted, and this was the language that the committee had seen and had provided feedback on.
Okay, and that's fine. You know, I appreciate that it came out of that committee. That, I guess I didn't have that understanding. I thought they had questioned those numbers and wanted it spelled out differently, but I'm really fine with it as long as people know when they're going to get paid extra and when they're not going to get paid extra.
I believe that this gives them that clarity that they were seeking.
Okay, that's fine, Brian.
Other questions? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, so at this point, I mean, it is just a first reading of those handbooks, and if anybody had any other questions.
I have a question. The new purpose statement, there's a line in there about that these handbooks cannot contravene any term in a contract. And I was just wondering, I don't believe we've had that type of language before. I mean, my understanding is most of the contracts are pretty boilerplate. What type of language are we talking about that I know I as a board member have never seen before?
Sure.
That would actually contravene. I thought the employee handbooks would be kind of the top of the chart.
Well, thank you, Dave, for bringing that question up. The language that purpose statement was language that I borrowed, and I'll use quotations, borrowed from Verona, who had it adapted from the WASB guideline language. And so the purpose behind it is just kind of just the clarification for employees that, if you have an individual contract, any special terms in your individual contract do come first. They are followed by handbook guidelines, and then and obviously handbook guidelines and policy should match. The purpose behind that is again for just contract clarity. An individual contract can be unique to an individual. In what instances, I think probably that, if I inferring your question, what could that mean? Really, I think the situations that refers to are, for instance, when we are working with an individual coming in, there can be certain aspects of fringe benefits, such as vacation days that don't, they're giving up a contractual situation that had maybe perhaps more vacation days. And if they were classified at a different year of experience, the vacation days that they could be gaining could be equal to or nearer to what they left. And that would be a situation where, if we're making a placement decision that is different from a handbook, that it is outlined that that the handbook doesn't strip their contract of that placement decision. To be honest, again, in the ideal world, and what my goal is to have alignment with all three of those, the trifecta of personnel stuff, which is a guidelines, policies, and if applicable, employment contracts, so guidelines, policies, and contracts. We would want to have all three of those aligned neatly, but in small situations, they might not. But in matters of substance, they certainly should and do.
I gotta say, I guess I'd rather see something in the employee handbook saying that during initial placement, there could be waivers granted or something along those lines, rather than a broad statement saying that any contract could have something that totally violates the employee handbook. Since the board is supposed to approve such contracts, it's almost, now we're sitting there thinking, do we have to look at every single individual contract to see if somebody happened to write something that we thought was problematic? Versus we approve the handbook and then we expect the contracts to basically follow the handbook.
And I would say, Dave, they do.
Well, then we shouldn't need the language. I mean, if we've been doing this thing with placing people slightly different for years, were we violating the handbook before? And
no, I don't believe we were. But this again, the purpose of the language, the WSB language is for purposes of clarity. That the purpose statement, you know, it speaks to that in the first paragraph, what it does provide. There is, again, there are a number of administrators that review all placements of individuals that come into the district, and so I'm not sure if you're wondering if all of a sudden, you know, I'm in some way going to go rogue and start to write into contracts things that aren't proper. There are, you know,
no.
they're reviewed, and so I'm certainly comfortable, and I very much believe in the idea of following guidelines, and 99.5% of the time the contracts are ivory pure, and they match the handbooks. And in small details, there's a difference. That is the reason for that statement, and certainly it is just that.
I totally agree with that statement, because what it does is it ties things together, and it's not a derogatory statement. It's setting the guidance.
I guess I think that policies and procedures are there for a reason. It has nothing to do with the people who are in a given position at any time. And Brian, that's nowhere near what I'm insinuating. I would rather see the policy and procedure be there so that no matter who is there, they're following the policy. And a blanket statement like that saying that a contract provision can go ahead and violate the procedure doesn't make sense to me. Because that means you can have basically individuals getting individual treatment different from the group of employees. And if we weren't violating the procedure before, why are we creating a piece of language that allows you to violate the procedure? And to me, it makes no sense. And I get WASB wrote it. WASB writes other things that some of us don't think is the greatest. That's why we have individual school boards, not just WASB. And I personally will vote against that language only because it's just too blanket. It's just too broad, and it's asking a school board to basically approve contracts that they don't know what's in them unless they look at every contract. And the reason for the handbook and the policy is so that the contracts are generally similar. And if we don't need to violate the procedure, why are we writing language to violate the procedure? Just my opinion.
And I guess to that, Dave, certainly I think that there are quite a number of items that you know, quite a number of us work to address in the handbooks, in the 6 different handbooks throughout the year. You know, and I would hate to see that that work jeopardized due to a sentence. And so certainly, you know, if the direction that comes to me is to edit that from the board and have that out before the second reading, you know, I absolutely will strike that, and it will be gone.
Dave, one of the things that you tossed out there was something, and I think, Brian, you were saying that in many cases where we're finding this is at the onset of hiring. So Dave, you were offering to add some language in there that it could provide just the latitude for placement. Is that what I heard you say?
If that's the big issue, then I think, and we've been doing it for years, then yes, we should enshrine that concept.
And again, I would, I will say that is absolutely something that existed long before I entered the office. And so, if you know, I can work on that language. And I guess operationally, would you want me to convene the HR committee to take a look at that? Or would you prefer just to go in front of the whole group as part of the second reading?
I would submit go to the HR committee and review the language.
Okay.
Ryan, could you give an example of how that might be applied in a scenario, some kind of scenario?
Are you looking for like? I'll give you a perfect example. An administrator that was hired. Our language says that in their first year of being an administrator, they're given. I wish I had the handbook in front of me. I'm going to use a number that I'm not 100%. That let's say they're given 1 week of vacation in their first year, and please don't hold me to that. I don't have it right in front of me. Maybe it's 2 weeks, but they're given 2 weeks in their first year. When the district that administrator came from, she had 3 weeks, and so she asked if there was a way that she could be credited as being a second year administrator to be given that third week of vacation equal to where she came from. So as we had already resolved all other issues of the contract, we did offer her the third week of vacation, with all other terms remaining as she was originally offered and placed. And that was then it was the difference, right? She's a first year in our district, but has vacation days commensurate to someone who's in their second year.
Right, and that was the spirit with which it was approved at the handbook level, but as I recall, and we viewed it as an opportunity to help in the recruiting of people that we're trying to bring into the district. And so I thought the committee had 100% support on that for that because it would enhance hiring.
Yeah, Mark, you're kind of, I would say, the conversation we had kind of in that regard talked about rehired teachers and ability to look at those things. And this is along the same lines of that idea, except teachers, don't get vacation days.
Right, right.
If I can just add a couple of things, I think the place where this is only really coming into play is at the hiring point. When I reflect back on the hiring decisions that we've made over the last, 13 years that I've been here, it's the example that Brian gives is the perfect example, because that's probably the latitude of change that exists between a handbook and an individual contract. And I can speak to it even from it personally. I mean, when I was hired by the board back in 08, that there was, that was a piece that I talked about in my negotiations, was an extra week of vacation to stay congruent with where I came from. And so that was a piece that the board made concessions with as part of that negotiations. And I think that's really the extent of what I've seen. There's nothing else that's being really negotiated. It's usually around some of those days. And then there's some language within some of the handbooks with regards to sick leave that people can carry over from one district to another. Those are the pieces that I see that are really impacted by that language. So I guess part of the question is if there's a concern about the language in the purpose statement, is there something else that you would accept as far as being able to articulate that somewhere else within the handbook?
I certainly would. I don't want to shackle trying to hire people if something of that consequence could bring them in. It's not a lot, but it's a bartering chip, and it is a competitive market. And I think so. If we can frame some language that we can approve of to get to that point, I'm all for it.
Is there a concern on the board of the practice of negotiating vacation days or even salary to bring somebody on?
I think we've been doing that for years. I've never heard anyone on the board say that that's a problem.
So
it's been talked about once or twice.
So you're okay having it someplace in the handbook?
Right. I just not a blanket statement saying anything in the handbook could be ignored.
Okay. All right.
I will absolutely go back and we can strike that. I'll bring it back to committee and look for a more comfortable statement that fits at some place in the guidelines to speak to that. And that, again, I will make sure that statement comes out of, whichever any handbooks and any and all handbooks that it's in.
Are there any other items on the handbook so that we're ready for the second reading next month? All right, are we good with HR then? And that takes us on to Facilities Committee, of which we have 4 items for the board to approve or not. And the first one's a softball field concession stand. The Booster Club basically presented the plan that you see in your book. Basically, for a budget of about $7,500 to $10,000, they want to expand the press box a little bit and put a concession stand there. They already have the money on hand, so there would be no financial requirement on the school district. The committee recommended it 3-0. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I guess I'd entertain a motion to approve the concession stand for the softball field.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second? Okay, I think that was Brian and Jack. And any discussion?
Dave, the question I have is just a small one. Is there electricity already running out there so that doesn't have to be run in, or is that part of the construction costs that they'll be incurring?
I believe there's electricity already inside that press box.
There's already electricity there, Mark.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The next one is the Pride Stone in Warrior Stadium. You'll see a submitted drawing for that. There was some discussion at the Facilities Committee about removing the logo from it, which the family donated, agreed to make that change. And now you have a new rendering showing the W. And again, this will not have any financial impact on the district.
If I can just interject here, Dave, this is a commemorative piece from the Meffert family in memory of their father and in commemoration of the commitment to and the passion for the activities that occur in Warrior Stadium. So that's where it's really initiated from and was presented by Randy Meffert and the family at the Facilities Committee.
Well, they'll be continuing expenses to put the plaques on by the school, or is there going to be a fund set up for us to do that?
I thought there was some discussion about that, but I don't recall.
I honestly don't recall that. Aaron, have you had any discussions with regards to that specific question that Brian poses?
No real big discussions on those. If it's a perpetual plaque like that, often the cost of the additional plaques are figured into that first cost. But even so, the plaque to add those on is a pretty minimal cost. It'd be a pretty minimal yearly cost. When I say minimal, we're talking, less than $100 a year to add. So it's not anything that would have a significant impact on my budget in any meaningful way.
Thanks, Aaron.
Any other questions? Joan? Oh. Is there a motion?
But I would like to really thank the Mefford family for this gift. I think that, we're fortunate as a district to have families that, give so much to our district.
Seeing no other questions, all those in, is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve this.
By Joan.
Second.
Second, I think by Jack, one not race. So maybe he can have his conference title on there. Any other comments?
I just want to say they really did do a good job improving the look, even between the first time we saw it to now. They made a lot of cosmetic changes in the design. It looks great.
Any other comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Next is the capital projects update, which you'll see the list of. One thing the facility committee did was request delaying the dishwasher project, as Randy mentioned a little earlier about the Fund 50 effect. And the committee recommended approval of the 2021 on a 3-0. So are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second. I think that was Brian and Jack. Any questions, comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. And number 4, energy savings projects with a bid from Westfall having to do with high school LEDs and changeouts. As you'll see in the 2 PDFs that were attached, the facilities committee recommended a 3-0 approval for this. Are there any questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
I think that was Jack and then Mark.
Sure.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. And that moves us on to the curriculum committee, which looks like we have to make a small change in the textbook requests. So is there a motion from someone on the curriculum committee about the textbook request for AP biology?
I make a motion that we accept the change in the biology textbook.
Second.
So that was Jack. I'm sorry, Judy and Mark. Any questions? Tim's ready to answer them, and he gets none. Sorry, Tim. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say no. And next, you'll see the minutes from the Goals Committee, but there are actually no actionable items there. If anybody has any questions from what was brought up in the meeting. Then administrative reports. Back to Randy.
Just real quickly, and I'm not going to take a whole lot of time on this. You can see in your packet the Waunakee facility planning timeline. This was just a high-level overview of kind of where we're going to be with re-engaging on some of the facility planning. As you see in that document, administration will start to re-engage with our core team, which is members of EUA and our Vogel team, starting in late July. Some of those dates may shift slightly depending on really the level of work that we have administratively and board-wise as we start the end of the next school year. But generally what you're going to see is a board workshop where we can reframe up really where we are within the facilities planning needs. And then leading into September, certainly where we have different meetings of our core team, of our board, leading up into a virtual community workshop. And it would be great if we could do something like that in person, and then leading up again to us doing a survey this fall. So this is just to give you kind of a high level step-by-step timeline of where we are as we would line up some of the work that we've postponed here for the next couple months and how we're going to pick it up come the fall. So this will be a piece that as it gets reviewed and re-looked at, we'll bring it back to you. But for right now, it just gives you a high level overview of how this work will move forward. So that's all I have.
Are there any questions, comments? Then we will move on to consideration of the pupil transportation handbook.
I think the next two items, Dave, Steve can handle.
So each year in June, we ask for the board to approve the pupil transportation handbook, because then that is provided to the buildings for their preparation of 2020-2021 student information. So this kind of begins the process of preparing information that will be sent out. I did write a big please note in board book that this document is based on our standard practices for transportation. This document is not a COVID-19 document related to guidelines that we may be seeing in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and that an addendum of some sort will likely have to be issued. So I just wanted to make you aware of that obviously the timing of when we've asked for this document to be approved in the past doesn't coincide well with waiting for guidance coming on pupil transportation capacity guidelines, and additional information will have to be provided at a later date when we understand what the transportation situation will look like for the fall. The admin team had the opportunity to provide feedback. For those of you who are on the board last year, you might recall we had more of a major rewrite last year where we made some pretty significant changes to the areas regarding student responsibility, Lamer's responsibilities, mostly related to behavior. I had worked with Dean Kaminsky at Prairie and the other principals to put that together. So this year, we don't really have anything significant to present to you, but I just wanted to make sure I pointed out that this document has not been revised for what may be coming out related to COVID-19 and transportation. And we'd be looking for a motion to recommend approval.
Is there a motion to approve the handbook?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
Steve, yeah, I'd just like to go on record as saying I'm still a little confused with the seating arrangements where we have 3 to a seat for K6, but then we have 3 to a seat for 712 as well. And I find it hard to believe if 3 is right for K6, that it's right for 712. And I don't know if that's a cost savings. I know it's probably legally allowable. I do remember many a night on a bus coming from a basketball game with the underclassmen at 3 to a seat, and it was miserable, and just the seniors could have 2. And I'm just wondering if there's even a potential down the road to look at that number, and might it impact the student behavior to the positive? It just seems awfully tight for 712 kids.
Yeah, that's a great point. We certainly do hear that feedback. In the routing of our transportation, the bus capacity or the full bus capacity is utilized in determining the routes. So that does mean that there is the potential on any given day for the second route, which you're referring to, the 5th through 12th graders, who are obviously significantly larger than the elementary students, to be more crowded on that route. We do often see decline in ridership past 9th grade. 9th grade is fairly common, and then it starts to tail off as students get their license or know other students who can drive them to school. But we do hear that. There's no question we do hear that. And based on our current setup for transportation, we do route based on the full capacity of the buses.
Steve, on the very first page, you have the in red draft to be submitted for approval. So I'm guessing that won't be printed
right
when it's put out.
Yep.
And then in red underneath, you have, please note, this handbook contains no references to COVID. Will that be printed?
Do you have a suggestion either way?
I think it really should be.
Okay.
If anything, I think you should also almost add exactly what you put in board book under there, stating that there will probably be an addendum so that they're going to know to look for it, and they're not going to have an expectation that this is how it will be.
Okay, that makes sense.
And even tell them, make sure you're paying attention to Infinite Campus all the way up till school day.
Right. Yep. Okay. Appreciate that.
So we have a motion on the floor. Any more questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And next is consideration of open enrollment, but that's not an actionable item, is it?
Yes, we do need approval of the open enrollment applications. So what we do have attached for your review, so there's a cover memo that kind of provides a high level background on the open enrollment law, the process, the number of applications in and out, the number of applications that by the decision that the board made in January should be denied or approved. And then there's specific lists that are attached. There's a specific list of student applications in, and there's a specific list of applications out. Please note on the out list, by state law, families can apply to up to 3 choices. So their names are listed multiple times if they've applied out to multiple schools. It's just the way the DPI processes them. When you go into the system, you would see them multiple times. So you see the detailed lists. There is one situation I definitely want to call your attention to. So on the in list, if everybody wouldn't mind clicking on the in list, there is a student at the very top that is highlighted. it's important to note that first grade is not a grade that we are accepting students. However, there is the approval process for siblings. We have a situation where two individuals are engaged, but they are not currently married. That does not meet the technical requirements of the DPI for siblings. I wanted you to be aware of this situation and for the board to weigh in on this. The DPI's technical answer is that we would deny this application, but I wanted you to be aware of it because it's a very unique situation. I've not seen one like this before, where someone was engaged, about to become married, and then would have resulted in a sibling relationship, and that would have met the DPI's definition. So it's a bit of a timing issue here, but I wanted to call that to your attention as far as needing your feedback on what you would like to do in this situation. I would describe all the other requests as very standard and are then based on the board decision back in January, which identified the capacity or seats that we had available for open enrollment students by grade level. So are there any comments or questions or in particular feedback on the situation that's highlighted for your review?
Do we even have an option to go against what they're saying?
The school board, if you said yes, the family that you're saying yes to isn't going to appeal that. The open enrollment process has a DPI appeal process for denials. So if a family is denied and they believe that that denial was arbitrary and did not follow our policy, they could file an appeal. This family may choose to file an appeal with the DPI if we say no and try to see if they could get the DPI to take another look at this, but they will not file an appeal if we say yes.
What do we open if we said yes? Is that going to be an open door for other things?
It would potentially open the door to a future situation like this. But I could say that I've never seen this before, where you had a situation where two individuals were engaged, but the timing was so much that during the open enrollment window, they weren't actually married. So this is very rare and unusual.
So Steve, we could turn them down today. They get married over the summer or whenever the wedding date is, then they reapply.
They would have to reapply for a future school year.
Right.
So basically,
Yes,
you
they
could just come back next summer and they'd be automatically accepted.
Yes, that's correct, Dave.
But why would we want to do that to create a family situation? I guess these are the kind of situations that it seems if we're going to err, I'd rather err on the side of kindness and support the family structure. To ask them to have two kids going to two different school systems, it just doesn't sound right to me. So I would hope we could approve of this exception.
I
would
agree.
agree.
Seems
Yeah, I do too.
So is there a motion to accept the open enrollment in and out as presented, including the one highlighted in yellow?
So moved.
Second.
Is that what you need, Steve?
That's perfect.
Any further questions or comments?
Steve, are there any sibling ones that are in the denial list at all that were not approved?
No.
Okay.
No, our policy has two areas of auto approval. One is when you move out of the district. The second one is once a student is accepted into the district, then a sibling is automatically accepted as well.
And now a non-sibling, but you say you're engaged.
Right. Yep.
What happens if they don't get married? And
But what do we face
I hate to bring that up.
But when you combine a household, they're not married, but you've got two families, they're basically joining a family, and so they don't have a piece of paper, but they are living together and you've got families together. It seems a little bit out of touch to say you have to have a marriage license to be considered if you're living in the same family.
Well, the reason I had anything to say about it is that I do think that there is some concern among the community that there are people who are not being accurate or honest in their reporting of where they live. I know for a fact in my neighborhood, someone drives in and drops their kid off at the bus every day. People in my neighborhood think that that's someone who's lying about their address to go to Waunakee School District. So I think that's the basis for why DPI has that rule, so that there is an actual legal relationship. I work with families all the time who are fighting about school district for their kids, and I think the rule's there for a good reason. Frankly, given my job, I don't know why they don't just get a quickie marriage to make it legal in the first place if they can have the party later. So that's the only concern I have on that, is that it's not a legal relationship. It's saying that you're married. I mean, I've counseled parents who have come to me and said, "Oh, we're married." Well, no, they never actually were legally married. It does have an effect. So I don't mean to be cold about it, but I think the DPI's rule is there for a reason. And that was the only reason I asked the question to Steve is, was there anyone who is a sibling who's not able to get in because we're letting someone who's a non-sibling get in? That was my only concern. I don't have any problem with approval.
I have that same concern. But I don't want to be harsh or anything like that too. I just, let's just hope that this doesn't open up a book, for future. That's all.
Any other questions or comments? All in favor of the motion of approving all the in and out on the spreadsheets, including the highlighted yellow, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
Nay.
I think I only heard one. So the motion
correct.
passes. So the motion passes, and that moves us on to consideration of the Dane County Driver Education Scholarship Program.
This has been before the board previously. A few years ago, Dane County set forth a initiative to help some students who are economically disadvantaged, to allow them access to driver's education. Partially it was established because the barrier to employment was often transportation, so they were trying to mitigate that. Kurt Ely has worked with this program and is again submitting the contract for us to continue with that work. It's been a success for us, and I would appreciate consideration of approval tonight.
Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
So Jack and Brian, any questions or comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. And that motion passes. Consideration of contract for vision services.
This is a recommendation we have students who have requirement of vision services in our district, either per their IEP or consultation with our staff for how to best service them. Since we don't have a position of that or enough students to justify our own position, we do contract that service out. And so we're asking for your approval of that contract tonight.
Motion to approve.
Second.
That was Jack and Brian again. Any questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. And now you have one announcement.
Yeah, this is kind of a really cool thing. When you take a look at community service, there's a adoration of our students who, for their level of community service that they've provided. And you can see the list of kids that are recognized there. There's a digital certificate that awards to our school district that just acknowledges our students who've had certain numbers of hours, 20 hours, 40 hours of service to their community. So I think that's a real positive thing to recognize our students for. So you can see the list on the front of the probably 25, 30 kids who Brian is sharing that update with.
I was muted. Okay, that takes us to the consent agenda. So someone could make a motion to approve the entire consent agenda, or someone can request something be pulled out.
I move we
Motion to
accept the
approve.
entire
That
agenda.
sounded like Mark and maybe Jack.
That's correct.
Okay, is there any discussion then as we're doing it as an entirety? Does anyone want anything pulled out? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. And the consent agenda is approved, which takes us on to board business. Legislative update. Hey, eventually the legislature is going to do something to fix the budget, and we're all scared of what it will be. I think that's about the biggest update there is, right, Randy?
I think the only updates I've received on that is anything with regards to regarding the budget will probably come late in the summer in August, partially because of the tax payments being pushed later this year and given that extension. And then also as far as anything with regards to any changes to the budget going into next year will probably come later in the summer. Obviously, that's not great timing for us, but certainly a piece that we'll be watching over the next few number of weeks and months.
And that takes us on to future agendas and meetings. Hopefully everybody remembers that we did approve a second meeting, so that will be June 22nd.
Yep. So what I asked Rebecca to do is just take a look at from now through September and look at a second meeting that was generally 2 weeks after our regular meeting. So that puts us with June 22nd, July 27th, August 24th. I have September 28th on there. That could be one that we set and decide if we need it or not.
So that board meeting would be at 7 p.m. since we're not doing a closed session.
That's a question I would pose to the board. It can be at whatever time you'd like. If you want to start it earlier, would be additional meetings. We could start whenever the board would feel comfortable.
Would people be good with starting at 6 then, since we normally start our close then?
I think earlier would be nice, so we're not going till 9:59.
What's
Hey, we're half an hour ahead of last month. So
when we get into the next board meeting, second board meeting, what is the purpose? Are we really going to focus on just the COVID, or?
Right. That's my intent, Jack. Is so June 22nd, what I would bring back to you is what I committed to you earlier on in tonight's agenda about some of the pieces with summer school. So I see really kind of look at our COVID presentation tonight. That's what I'm looking to focus on during those meetings.
Would it make sense, instead of sitting here until 10 o'clock every board meeting, to break this agenda up, seeing that we're planning on 2 board meetings a month.
There's certainly ways that we can do that. If there are committees that meet between now and June 22nd, we could put some of those items on there. I would see COVID being a standing item on each of our meetings, but certainly if there's things that are ready to move forward, I'm willing to move those and kind of try to balance them out as much as possible.
My concern with that is a precedent of moving to multiple meetings per month, other than for emergency situations, which COVID certainly is. We talked about doing this either for COVID, we talked about doing it maybe for referendum. I'd hate to start splitting up the entire agenda and make it a practice.
Why don't we do this then? Let's quickly, someone make a motion that the second meeting either only be COVID or be COVID and committee meetings, either version, and then we can just vote it up or down.
I vote COVID plus committee meetings to break this apart, or shorten the monthly meeting.
Is there a second for Jack's motion? Seeing none, your motion fails for lack of a second. So it seems that the consensus would be that it only be COVID related.
Very good.
The only other question is 6 or 7 p.m. I would entertain a motion to set them for 6 p.m.
6 p.m.
6 from
p.m.
Jack.
Good.
And that's second from Brian. Any discussion? All those in favor of 6 p.m. say aye.
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 And
Aye.
those against say no. So the second meetings will be at 6 p.m.
All right, super. Thank you. When we take a look at other meetings, I mean, Brian, you were talking about an HR committee meeting.
Yeah, we would, I think it could be pretty brief, and I would be ready to do that as early as next week. Anytime during the day or late afternoon, whatever works for the committee.
I'm open.
I am open.
I'll be in the North Woods, but I can be there, I think.
Any day but Tuesday.
Brian, do you want to pick a date then?
Do you
Want
want
to be
to?
back from the North Woods? Do you want to be back from the North Woods on a particular day?
I'll be up there from Friday through next weekend. So I'll have internet access, so I'll be able to jump on. So
Okay.
just don't make it during prime fishing times.
I'll take a look at the solar lunar calendar and make sure we get it at the low points.
Okay.
Do you guys want to go ahead and do it right away on Monday the 15th?
Sure.
And again, I can do it at any point that day, day, afternoon, evening, whatever works best.
How about late morning, 11 o'clock? Brian, does that work for you?
Too hot to fish then.
Yep, that works.
Okay, 11 o'clock.
Okay.
Steve, do you need a budget meeting for this month?
I do, yes. So it would need to be in July, and it's going to be a tight timeline. So the DPI does not release the state equalization aid estimate till July 1st. And I'll need like the 6th or the 7th to get it ready. So I could do it like the 8th or the 9th, but the committee would not really have much prep time. Or we could do it the 13th prior to the board meeting, and that way the committee would have some time to look at it. It's whatever the preference is.
So you're saying you could have it ready the 9th or the 10th?
Yep. It just wouldn't be a lot of prep time for it. I could probably have the packet ready by the 7th, the end of the day on the 7th. So it could be any time after then, depending on how much time the committee members would want to look at it.
How's the 9th work?
9th works.
I'm good with the 9th.
9th works.
Do you have a preference for time, Jack?
5:30. Does that work for you guys?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Mike, I know that we had talked about this committee meeting more frequently. Is there anything that you would like to pull that committee forward to do in the next month?
No.
All right, thank you. Any other committees, Tim, anything with curriculum that needs to be done?
Randy, we could probably use a fairly short curriculum committee meeting before the July meeting. I don't know about the committee's availability, maybe Monday the 29th or Tuesday the 30th.
So throwing out the 29th and 30th of June for the curriculum committee. So Judy, Joan, and Mark.
Either works for me.
Yep, I'm open too.
Yes.
Okay.
Time?
Tim, do you have a preference?
Well, I think, why don't we look at the Monday and maybe 3:30 on Monday the 29th in the afternoon?
Okay.
Okay.
That works.
Thank you.
I think that's all I need tonight, Dave, unless somebody else has a request for another committee.
Hearing none, I would just take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? Jack and Brian. And all those in favor of turning off Zoom, say aye.
Aye.
All those in favor of staying on Zoom, say no. And we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.